sitting from New Delhi, this is a frustration that a lot of security analysts over here sort of voice all the time. A lot of American commentators, are different because you've actually gone deeper into this. Why is Pakistan given a free reign over here? Because
they're not. You hadn't asked about that part yet, but I have
I'm
a whole
coming.
section in my book about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, no,
So you talked about the Bojinka plot, Ramzi Yusuf. You talk about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. You talk about Osama bin Laden, Abu Zubaydah. These are all this is the elite class of Al Qaeda, all found in Pakistan. You have the startings of, the nuclear sort of issue with North Korea, in Iran, all have their origin stories written in Pakistan. You have Muammar Gaddafi sending nuclear material to Pakistan. All of this is documented in State Department cables. So you have these two huge bogies over here. What is this sort of love story that American presidents have with Pakistani military dictators?
Well, in the 1980s, it was all about sticking it to the commies. That was the enemy. And whoever we have to work with, fine. And they knew all along that the Pakistanis were developing nuclear weapons. And they tried to kind of dissuade them from it, but they weren't willing to make them stop because they needed their cooperation for the war in Afghanistan. That was the motivation there. In fact, if you go back one, A.Q. Khan stole those documents from a company called Urenco, which was like a joint international company. And the CIA knew that he stole the stuff, and they let him leave the country with it because they wanted to see where he'd go. And, they were part of that and let that happen. And then, yes, it's true that he sold aluminum tubes to North Korea, although I don't believe they ever did anything with them. All of their nuclear weapons have been made out of plutonium since then from their Soviet-built old Yongbyon reactor. So whatever experiments they ever did with enriching uranium doesn't seem to have had any effect on their nuclear weapons program. What they gave to Iran, it's true that Iran has used that, but again, not for nuclear weapons, just for a civilian program, at least so far. And Iran only turned to A.Q. Khan because Bill Clinton wouldn't let them buy light water reactors from China, which light water reactors produce waste that cannot be converted into nuclear weapons fuel. So Bill should have just let them build the light water reactors. We might have never had this controversy over their uranium enrichment or any of this whole time if he'd just done that. And then with Libya, he bought a bunch of junk from A.Q. Khan, and I don't know what he sold them, but whatever he had was just sitting in crates in warehouses because he didn't have the experts to put together any kind of nuclear program whatsoever, much less a nuclear weapons program. So just as far as that goes. But in my first book, Fool's Errand, I have, and I guess in enough already, I address this at least to some degree, I think. But definitely in Fool's Errand, I have a section of the book is called Pakistan's Role. And it explains how Afghanistan is Pakistan's strategic depth. In the event that they get into a nuclear war with India, they need to be able to retreat into Pakistan. And so it was in their interest the whole time that America was fighting to install a Tajik, Uzbek, and Hazara coalition alliance in Kabul at the expense of the Pashtuns. It made sense for the Pakistanis to keep the Afghan Pashtuns in play in the form of the Taliban insurgency, if nothing else, to keep the country destabilized and prevent the Northern Alliance from truly consolidating power over the land. Because if they did, they could preclude the Pakistanis access to the country in the event of an emergency. So that was their highest strategic priority. The Americans, I think, took a long time to figure this out, that the Pakistanis started playing a double game by about 2005, and the Americans started saying, hey, wait a minute, by about 2007, but they could never figure out what to do about it. They're completely dependent on the Pakistanis because of the mountain range there. You have to go all the way from the port of Karachi. You have to go, I think it's 700 miles up to the Khyber Pass to get into Afghanistan. So the only other route for American supplies into Afghanistan was the northern route through Russia, which they did not want to call in that favor. They didn't want to have to owe any favors to Vladimir Putin, so they avoided that as much as they could. Now, in 2012, there was an incident where the Americans caught the Pakistani army equipping Afghan Taliban on the border in Paktika province. And the Americans blasted them with, I think, an Apache gunship and killed them. And so the Pakistani military got pissed off and they closed the highway. And so for the entire year of 2012, America had to go through the northern route, with which Putin obliged and let America do that. So They were wholly dependent on the Pakistanis for that. Now, in 2009, Obama comes in, and there are, according to John Kiriakou, 29 Al-Qaeda guys, actual Arab friends of bin Laden, hiding in Pakistan. And now Barack Obama, instead of sending in CIA guys with knives to cut these guys' throats or kidnap them out the window in the middle of the night, he sends in the drone warriors. And the drone warriors killed thousands of innocent people in their attempt to hunt down 30 guys. Now, in order to do this, Barack Obama makes a deal with the government of Pakistan. That time, I think it was Prime Minister Sharif, to allow him to do this. But part of that deal then was America had to help the Pakistanis launch their own civil war against the Pakistani Taliban, the Tariqi Taliban, up in the northern federally administered tribal territories in the Swat Valley. That killed 80,000 people. It just turned that whole area completely upside down and created a massive refugee crisis. A refugee crisis where, just like you had Afghan Taliban hiding out in Pakistan for safe haven, being supported by the Pakistani government, now you had Pakistani Taliban hiding out on the Afghanistan side of the border, being protected by the government in Kabul and used against the Pakistanis as well as against the Afghan Taliban. Now, one of those groups, a couple of years later in 2013, when it was all the fashion over in the Levant, hoisted the black flag and declared themselves loyal to the Islamic State. And that's what we now call ISIS Khorasan, or ISIS-K, was born out of Pakistani Taliban refugees from the Pakistani war that Obama helped them wage as a bribe for them letting him wage his drone war to kill a measly stinking 29 friends of Osama bin Laden who were supposedly still hiding in that country. And then another part of when Obama came in was he launched the massive surge of 2009 through 12, where he ended up sending 70,000 extra troops. People always say 30,000. Yeah, 30,000 after 40,000. He sent 70,000 extra troops to Afghanistan to vastly escalate the war, especially in Nangarhar in the east on the Pakistani border and down in the south in Helmand province and in Kandahar province. And there, you know, this completely ridiculous and retarded and bankrupt strategy, intellectually bankrupt strategy of counterinsurgency. This was going to be their little playland and their showcase to demonstrate how brilliant these army technicians and tacticians were, that they could go in, clear, hold, and build an area and convince the local women, children, and elderly, I guess, to hate and turn against their brothers, sons, fathers, and uncles and husbands, and regard them as the enemy, and accept American Marines from the other side of the planet with different skin and a different religion and a different language in every way to be their security force instead, and to regard their own men-kin as the enemy. Well, that's about as stupid as I just explained it to be. It's as stupid as it sounds. And guess what? It didn't work. All they did was kill a bunch of innocent people and then lose anyway. And so, of course, Helmand, you know, they launched this massive attack with the Marines in Sinjar that they took the town, but to no end. They ended up giving it back. Nothing happened there. That was the big test case. And then they didn't even try it in Kandahar City, which was supposed to be the victory in battle. And Petraeus went slinking home, the great American fraud that is, General David Petraeus, went slinking home with his tail between his legs, where he then got appointed head of the CIA, where he tried to force the CIA to only ask Army officers how the war was going. Yeah, which didn't work.
We saw him interview Al-Julani recently in the UN.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, then he took Al-Qaeda's side in Libya and then Syria before he got caught leaking above top secret documents to a prostitute who was writing a book about what a great guy he was. And these were documents describing conversations he had with the president about American strategy and foreign policy, the highest level of classification that could possibly exist. And instead of getting life in prison, he got a slap on the wrist. And now he gets to go around, being an investment banker and parading around with a slayer of Americans who, David Petraeus helped arm up the Sunni insurgency in Mosul in 2004. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani
Yeah.
was fighting for the Sunni insurgency in Mosul in 2004, killing American troops with guns that David Petraeus gave him. And then, so yeah, it all comes full circle there. Anyway, so then, essentially, again, the war was an attempt to prop up this coalition of Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Hazaras, who are about 20% of the population each, making up 60% majority when combined, but against the 40% plurality population, the Pashtuns. And they're just never going to accept that. And even though the sock puppet president, the first one, Hamid Karzai, was a Pashtun, all that meant was that he appointed the very worst Pashtun warlords in the country to criminalize and brutalize these poor people, tyrannize them, steal from them, rape their children, murder their families, sell them drugs, and all the rest. And so it was just chaos. And, you know, David Petraeus, speaking of the great American fraud, he at one point admitted that the local Pashtun culture or the Taliban's methods of dispute resolution, criminal and civil, are preferable to the local population compared to the American court system that we have built for them there.
Wow.
Okay, well, that's the end of the argument then, right? That we create a police chief, a mayor, and a governor, and they are criminals and child rapists and drug dealers and murderers. The Taliban comes and says, everybody sit on the blanket and let's talk this through, as per our custom for the last 6,000 years. And the people say, okay, let's do that. We'll sit on the blanket and talk this through.
Thank you, Justin.
So that's it. And that was America's war. And the whole thing, it was, you know, I mean, first of all, because I'm an American, Americans got lied into that thing. And a lot of them got killed in that thing, including guys who are now friends of mine's, good friends, died over there. Friends of mine, you know, fought really hard over there, damn near died, and did kill people because they signed up to protect this country from enemies that threaten it. Not because they signed up to be an errand boy for some agenda, but they got used and abused. And 2,500 of them almost got killed. And many tens of thousands of them got maimed.
Yes.
At the same time, they killed high tens of thousands, maybe more than 100,000 people there, maybe more than 2. I don't know if anyone really knows. If we calculate the excess deaths, how many people died in the Afghan war that otherwise would not have, even under Taliban rule and the economic life as it was circa the year 2000 or something like that, it's in the high hundreds of thousands of people who died who otherwise would have lived from either just malnutrition or uncurable, or pardon me, normally easily treatable diseases going untreated, and just overall deprivation, lack of quality of life. And you could add in, all other things being equal, the advance in the quality of life that would have been taking place under Taliban rule had America stayed out the whole time. Just ipso facto, there would have been more hospitals. There would have been more roads. There would have been more schools, education for medical professionals and engineers and whatever else.
Yes.
All other things being equal, they would have had much more capital investment in actually building their society, which of course, that's a whole other part of the story too, is the giant scam of the State Department paying these contractors for all these absolutely ridiculous infrastructure projects that a local, actual, natural, or you know, somewhat popularly supported government would never try to do. Like build a giant dam that no one can operate in the middle of nowhere, where there's no electric lines to anywhere from there anyway. And the whole thing, you sink $10 billion into the desert. You know, never mind 10 million on a school here or there. I mean, we got absolutely, they did road projects that you just would not believe, that of course went all completely to hell and were nothing but boondoggles the whole time. And the whole time with all that aid money going in many cases, probably most cases, directly to the Taliban, who are the ones accepting the money and then using it for their insurgency against the United States. You even have situations where you have convoys of American supplies headed way out to the countryside to an American fire base out there. And they're paying the Taliban to drive the front and rear car to provide security for the American convoy, to go
Right.
drop off the fuel where we're paying $1,000 a gallon or whatever it is to get the fuel out there. And then the Taliban takes all the money and buys weapons from the Afghan National Army to use to kill our guys.
I'm glad that you brought up the aid part, and I'm going to end on this. This is a final conclusion on this. So a lot of that aid also went to Pakistan, and a lot of that money, military aid, also was used in Pakistan's aggression towards India in all the conflicts that we have had. Now, you spoke about sort of the civil war that happened in Pakistan, or the serious unrest that happened in the late 2000s, early 2000s. Would you speculate? And I know there was a lot of reporting on mainstream US newspapers like the New York Times and all. Did the Americans at the time have a handle on Pakistan's nuclear program? Were they tracked? Was there a real fear that these bombs could get into the hands of terrorists?
Yes, I think that's always been a fear. And, the reporting has been that the Americans worked with the Pakistanis to secure their nuclear weapons in different pieces and parts, in secure facilities around the country where hopefully anybody ignorant enough to be a bin Ladenite would not be able to figure out what to do with it all, and would not be able to get their hands on it all and not be able to put it together in any useful way. So I don't know whether that's really true. It
Mm,
makes it much harder to use it as a nuclear deterrent
mm,
if India, for example, is convinced that, hey, they can't even get their act together and get their nukes put together in a few days, we can whoop them by then or something like that. So
mm,
it makes sense that they would keep at least some of their nukes at the ready,
mm.
which of course is a real danger because there are completely fanatical lunatics in that country
Yeah,
who, would be quite willing to start off a major confrontation like that if they could.
yeah.
Although, and look, it's the age-old question when it comes to these intelligence agencies and these terrorist groups is, we know that ISI supports the Lashkar-e-Taiba, for example, and other Pakistani terrorist groups. But to what degree do they really control everything they do? I don't know. And, for example, I don't believe that despite all the support that the United States and its allies have given Al-Qaeda over the years, that our government controls everything that they do. I think
Mm,
that they have their own agendas and they'll do what they want. The Americans essentially, they think they're clever. They can use these guys to kill Serbs or Russians or Shiites or whoever their enemies are, or potentially even Indians, although I don't have any reason to believe the Americans are behind that. But
mm,
um, overall, they've been backing this, extremely, revolutionary political Islam for these, what you might consider to be very minor interests and ends around the world. Breaking Kosovo off from Serbia, that's
mm,
worth committing high treason on Osama bin Laden's behalf? No way, right? And so they've been willing to do that. And yet this whole time, and look, I'm no expert on every different sect of Sunni Islam, but I can tell you that I know that it's true, right? That there are millions of Salafi and Wahhabis who are, the Wahhabis, they say, are the most literal interpretation of the original texts, where the Salafis say, oh, we should live like it's the 7th century because that was
mm,
when everything was perfect under the days of Muhammad. This guy, well, there are millions of people who are that radical and that fundamentalist, call them that far to the radical right of Sunni Islam, who are not political, who don't participate in terrorism or really politics at all. Most religious fundamentalists around the world are quietists, and that is they've been instructed by their religious leaders that God made the current king the king. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the king, would he? And it's
right.
not your place to question the king if God's the one who put him there, is it? So you shut up and go to mosque, go to church, go to whatever temple and obey and leave the civil authority to somebody else. That's
Mm,
almost the universal message of religion. You might even think it's why religion was invented. But hey, anyway, the vast majority of even very radical religious fundamentalists in Sunni Islam are not political. Even at the height of the Islamic State, you had like 100,000, maybe 150,000 fighters, and most of those were just local Iraqi conscripts who really didn't have a choice but to join in the first place. The Islamic State said, calling all Muslims. Pff, nobody came. There's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Nobody showed up to fight for the Caliph Ibrahim just because he said that God ordained him the Caliph. That didn't seem to impress anybody, right? So I think that's an important part to keep in mind about all of this here. And I don't really know exactly how all the different Muslim sects interacted with each other in the days before World War II and all that. But I know that since World War II, Britain and the United States, in concert with the Saudis and then later with the Pakistanis, have worked very hard to cultivate the most intolerant, the most extremist, the most head choppinist of the Salafi terrorists in the mold of Osama bin Laden. Even the Muslim Brotherhood itself was created by Britain and Saudi Arabia in the first place. Now, does that mean that without them, everybody would be a Sufi and just, like a Muslim Buddhist who just wants to whirl and get along or whatever? Maybe not. But it is the case that the Western intelligence agencies have used the Saudis to encourage the absolute worst of these religious kooks to be their terrorist mercenaries, mostly because they don't mind dying. So they're very effective mercenaries when you want to send them out there and get some dirty work done. But then, man, I'm sorry, but September 11th, even if you're the world's worst cynic, September 11th should have been the end of that. The fact that David Petraeus and Associated Traders would go back to supporting these men after September 11th and after Iraq War II, where they were the worst part of the Sunni insurgency that killed 4,000 of our 4,500 guys that died in that war. For Petraeus and Hillary and Obama and the rest to go back to supporting al-Qaeda in Libya and then in Syria and then in Yemen since then is absolutely the highest treason, unforgivable, unbelievable, and intolerable that they would be able to do that and get away with it, and especially for all these years. I mean, they took the turn back toward bin Laden in the spring of 2011. And here we are talking about it in 25, like it's just a curiosity of history, right? And when they've essentially had us back on the side of the bin Ladenites ever since then.